Hello everybody. Now this season the Raptors are good. In fact, they're really good, surpassing everybody's expectations. But will the amount of depth that the Raptors have actually make them worse? So right now, the Raptors are playing a 10-man rotation, excluding DeLon Wright, and this is because Norman Powell, which is really the main issue of debate in this podcast, is finally playing confident basketball again. Right? The average playing time off the bench is roughly 15 to 20 minutes for the Raptors team. And anybody who's played or coached basketball knows that you really need to give players that amount of time to heat up, find the rhythm of their game, take some shots. And really, if you're playing a player less than 10 minutes per game, then you as a coach, you're not really playing that player for the value they add while on the court, but rather because you're allowing another player to rest. They're just that quick substitution. You're just milking the clock at that point. So when DeLon's finally added back to the rotation, this is the big question. Is it bad that he's going to be added back to the rotation? And comment below throughout the podcast and say what you think. But when he's finally added back into regular minutes, we can expect that either the average playing time of all the guards off the bench will diminish, right? Or we'll see a player's time, one singular player, get completely cut. Most likely Norman Powell, because OG, Fred, JV, CJ, they're all a lock, right? We can all agree that they're a lock to play each game. CJ probably shouldn't get so many minutes. He's very hot and cold, but it's hard to play a lineup with Fred, DeLon, and Norm on the floor at the same time. That's super small, and the alternative would be to not rest the starters, right, who play the 3 and up, such as Kawhi, Danny Green, Siakam. But, I mean, Nick Nurse isn't going to allow his key players to play 35 minutes or more a game because he's smart. He knows that they need a certain amount of rest because playoffs is really all that matters this year. So we can see that dropping the average play time of the entire bench unit, that's not smart, right? Players need a certain amount of time before they can make the impact on the floor. And regardless of how good the overall team is doing, right? If the team is getting a W each night, it's hard for a player to be energized to play every day in and day out when they know at maximum they're going to be contributing 10 minutes per game. So I arrived at the most likely conclusion, and this is the real issue here. The most likely conclusion is that DeLon and Norm will be again fighting for minutes this season. And as evidence has shown past season, and this could be also due, of course, to the GoDaddy curse, Norman Powell, it might finally be lifted. He's playing in the first couple of games more energized than we've ever seen him since before he got his contract extension. But what we've seen in past seasons is that significantly limiting his time just doesn't work in getting the most talent from this guy, right? But this is the main issue then. One of them, DeLon Wright or Norman Powell, is going to have to get scrub minutes. And who should it be, right? And really it's counterproductive to have either a player... Okay, first I'm going to ask, before I even get into this conversation, do you think that playing 11-man or 12-man rotation is good or bad? I'm going to sound my opinion right now. I think it's bad. I think once playoff time comes, you're going to play an 8-man rotation. That always happens. You're going to ride the starters, the starting 5, for as much time as possible, and then you're going to pay your next best 2 or 3 players. Now the Raptors, they'll probably still try to stick to around a 10-man, but there's no way in the playoffs, because of the amount of superstars that you need to keep on the court at all times, that you're going to be going into that 11th and 12th man. Right? So it's best, I think, to be more reasonable and to confirm in the players what the roles are before the playoff starts. Okay, sound off if you think that is appropriate to say or not. But the main issue here then is DeLon or Norm. The argument for insurance, right? It's good if there's injuries throughout the entire season, right? But if there's not injuries, then you're going to be playing a player with too much talent, or a player with too much talent. Having a player like Lorenzo Brown or Greg Monroe, that's much better to have because they're expendable, right, as your backups, as your complete reserves. Because regardless on the outcome of the season, if you lose them, it's not the worst thing. Of course, you still want them to be good players, but the reserve should be players that you don't mind throwing into a trade deal, that you don't mind losing in the free agency signing. Not to have a player that you really want to continue to reassign, to acquire if he's going away. So neither DeLon or Norm are expendable, right? Norman Powell's locked into a roughly $10 million a year contract for the next 4 years. So why sit a player that you're paying so much on the bench And why, essentially, if you're saying he's the 11th most valuable player, pay him so much money, right? So he can't be reasonably traded if you can't convince other teams that he's deserving of the value that he is. So by that logic, Norman Powell should be playing, right? The Raptors get his productivity, and if he's good, they can keep him. Perfect. The amount of money is finally justified. And if he's mediocre, then they can trade him away and dump the contract. Also fine. I've been maybe arguing that that's the best thing to do, but of course no team is going to want to burden that, that contract until he proves that he's actually worth it. But on the other hand, if he's locked in for 4 years and DeLon's only locked in for 1 to 2, then maybe it's okay to allow Norm to sit, waste another season, put him in the garage and allow him to rust, so that if they can't reacquire DeLon, right, because the Raptors will likely want to keep DeLon on. Ben and I are both really high on him, think that he will probably be fighting for a starting point guard position in the next couple of years. So if they can't reacquire him, then because Norm's on such a long contract, they have the assurance that they still have him, right? So they're not losing a significant piece. Brings us to DeLon. Getting significantly less money on a shorter contract, is it valuable to play him more? Right? He'll command way more attention in the free agency when the time comes, and then the Raptors would have to fight even more to get him to stay. But he's becoming a player that I said already, we reckon he's soon deserving of his own starting position. So it'd be extremely unlikely that a player of his skill level would be interested in staying in Toronto if he's completely underused. So the issue is play him and then have to pay him more, or don't play him and then he'll certainly want to leave. I think that his performance in the past is already enough to get him attention once his time in free agency comes. So looking at it just from that contract money standpoint, there's pros and cons for playing both players. Right? So if they both have the up and down side from this financial standpoint, the question is, really, who is the better player? Right? Both players are relatively similar in some aspects: athletic, long, could defend, questionable IQ at times. DeLon is clearly the much more finesse ball handler, but Norman Powell is a far better shooter right now. Right? DeLon is working on his jump shot, but right now, Norm is better from 3. Right? But I'd be keen to give DeLon the slight edge because of his playmaking ability, which is extremely important, right? But it's tough because Norman Powell has these brilliant flashes where he crosses opponents, poster dunks, splashes crazy threes, right? But again, this provides no clarity. You would almost want to play this, both guys. But then you have to circle back to the opening statement. If you decrease the playing time of the entire bench unit, right, to allow both of these guys to play and share relatively equal minutes, then you're going to decrease the overall productivity of the bench, right? And if you go back and forth, then playing one guy one evening, another guy the other evening, you have to really consider how much of the ego that wears down. Not everybody is equipped day in and day out to, only play limited minutes and some days sit on the bench. I think you really want to play a guy that every single night is going to contribute to getting a W. So I think that we're going to see one of the two players suffer. Right? If there's no way to accommodate both of them in an 11-man rotation, I think one of them will be phased out. Unless, of course, there's injuries. But we certainly can't hope for that. So let me know what you guys think about this. I think I personally, and this might be crazy, but I think the best option would be to sleep on DeLon. Right? Believe it or not. I think we should ride the Norm wave, see what happens, give him maybe 10, 15 games, right? Maybe DeLon won't even be back until then, right? But see what happens. And then keep DeLon as the third point guard, right? Instead of trying to force an 11th man into the rotation. So I know that most people like DeLon, me included, right? But my recipe for success for a team in the regular season is to have a rotation of 8 to 10 players, right? And I think the roles become too uncertain after you go beyond that. But I don't have the answer to this problem. Should it be DeLon? Should it be Norm? Is there a way for all of them to play? Right? Maybe this crazy small ball lineup, if you're playing guys off the bench with Fred, DeLon, Norman Powell, maybe you can push CJ out of the rotation, right? Maybe that's the option there. I think to sacrifice his height maybe is not the best, but he's been arguably the least effective, the least efficient, the least productive player on the Raptors unit. And we can see what Nick Nurse is playing for this season is that even if the Raptors are up by a lot, even if, well, they haven't been down by a lot yet, but even if the Raptors are up by a lot, he plays the bench unit. Most coaches would ride out that lineup until, the game gets really close, really tight, and then, oh no, you put the starters back in to close out the game. Nick Nurse, we've seen in a couple games now, there was a big lead, the bench unit goes out, they let, -6. So just a very small swing, and because they're not playing good, he puts back the starting unit in. Right, Nick Nurse is playing basketball where he expects everybody to go out regardless of how much minutes and contribute immediately. And if you're playing bad, he's taking you back in. So he's obviously the coach. He knows more than I do. But this is sort of the situation on DeLon. I think it's unfortunate for the Raptors team that they have so much depth, right? Because now you have 11 guys, even Lorenzo Brown, 12 guys that are good players, but you can't play them all. And in my opinion, it'd almost be nicer, or it would certainly be nicer to have the last 3 to 4 players on your bench, right? The 10th, 11th, 12th man as expendable players. Good players, but players that have no value in future seasons besides, maybe wanting to re-sign them, having them as insurance, and then having the ability to throw them in package deals when you're trying to make trades. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know if any of this hit home, if I've completely missed the mark. I think it's going to be an interesting season to see how it plays out. Thankfully, the starting lineup they don't have the woes of past, right? They don't have that lethargic third quarter start. They don't have this crazy swings in mood where it brings down the entire energy of the team. They are committed to playing defense, committed to scoring. And again, maybe it's a good problem for the Raptors to have, so many good players. But this time the issue is with the bench. How do they deal with it? How do they deal with DeLon when he comes back? How do they deal with Norman Powell, who's been a huge question mark, who's maybe the X factor, who's maybe the guy that's, going to bring this team down? A lot of unknowns makes for a lot of intrigue and a lot of excitement. Something will happen. Something will either give, something will break, or everything will come together. Let me know what you guys think. If you stuck it through this long, thank you so much. Hit the subscribe, like, sound off in the comments. Looking for ideas as well. So hang on for the ride. Cheers.